What's going on, people? It's your boy NGS, back at it with another video, and oh boy, what a special video that we've got today, y'all. As I'm sure you can see by the title and what's on the screen, today I have the esteemed honor, nay, the privilege of talking to you guys about my time playing Lost Judgment. Now, before we dive into the nitty-gritty of the video, I have a couple of people who I do want to shout out. So first things first, I want to give a huge shout out to everyone at SEGA and their communications department. Shout out to my boy David, because they hit me up a few weeks back asking if I wanted to check out Lost Judgment, and I don't think I've ever replied to an email faster than I ever have. Literally, I just opened up the title. It said, hey, you want to check out Lost? And I just said yes. Literally, that's just how it turned out, because as I'm sure many of y'all know, or if you're watching this video for the very first time, I'm a huge fan of the Yakuza franchise. I've been playing this series for well over 10 years now, and just to be in the position to have the opportunity to check out one of the latest games in this Yakuza universe, if you will, because it's not just Yakuza. We have Judgment that's become its own franchise. I'm just at a loss for words. So thank you so much to everyone over at SEGA and Ryuga Gotoku Studios. But most importantly, I want to give a huge shout out to every single person watching this video. Whether you've been subscribed to the channel for 10 years or you're tuning in for the very first time, none of this would be possible without all of y'all guys' support. All of y'all watching the streams, liking the videos, sharing the stuff on social media. From the bottom of my heart, thank you so much, you guys. Truly. And now that we've gotten all the mandatory health warnings out of the way, in addition to all the wiped away tears, let's talk about Lost Judgment, y'all. Now, there are a couple of things that I do want to mention before we dive into the thick of things. So first things first, this is not going to be a review, nor is this really going to be a first impressions, if that makes sense. I've been playing Lost Judgment for the past couple of days, and I've clocked in roughly 10 or so hours. I'm closing in on the end of chapter 3. And the reason why I am hesitant on calling this a first impressions, if you will, and you could say this is a fault for the entire Yakuza franchise as a whole, the first 10 hours or so aren't really the best indication of what this series has to offer. Most of the games in the series, especially the later ones, have gotten longer in their length. And for better or for worse, a lot of those are mainly cutscenes that take up the time. A lot of the new things that they're introducing don't really come into play until you get past the first couple of chapters. So I'm at the point right now where I'm starting to scratch the surface of a lot of the cool stuff, but not to the point where I can accurately report on every single thing about it. So if you're watching this video trying to get a deep dive understanding of all the new elements in the game, I'm unfortunately not at that point where I can report on it. But I do have some thoughts on some of the things that I was able to ascertain from my 10 hours or so of playing the game. So we might as well just start on the title screen and get a couple of things out of the way. I know I'm going to be getting a couple of questions on this. What platform am I playing Lost Judgment on? Well, the gameplay that is currently captured right now is from the Xbox Series X, rendered at 1080p. Unfortunately, that's what my capture card is able to put out at this point until I get my hands on a nice 4K one. But it's being played on Xbox Series X at 1080p, 60 frames per second, but it is available on the PlayStation 5, the PlayStation 4, of course, the Xbox Series S, and strangely enough, it's on the Xbox One. And the reason why I said strangely is because the Judgment Remaster, which of course came out on PS5 and Xbox Series consoles earlier this year, that wasn't available on the original Xbox One. So it's very strange that Xbox gamers, if you have the Series console, you have access to both games, but if you have the OG Xbox One, you have access to the sequel and not the first one. That's just completely bizarre. And the other question I'm going to be getting asked is, I am interested in checking out Judgment. I've heard a lot of good things on this game. I've heard a lot of people hyping up the sequel. Can I jump into the sequel if I haven't played the first one? And I give the answer that I give to everyone else who's been playing a lot of these games in the Yakuza verse. I look at it like this. Do you need to know every single thing about the previous game to know what is happening in this game? No, you do not, but you get a better appreciation and understanding for the bulk of the characters that are introduced, because this game does not spend any time reintroducing characters other than a little blurb like, hey, my name is Yagami, I'm this detective agency, this is my best friend Kaito, these are our shenanigans. That's literally the extent that the game goes at explaining the situation. So not too dissimilar from every time they do a recap of a show when they come back for another season. So if you're okay with just jumping into this, knowing small little aspects and possibly being confused at this dude's friend group and why it's so diverse, then by all means, play this game. But of course, I'll always recommend people play the first Judgment game just to get, like I said, a good understanding and grasp of these characters and where they could potentially go in the future. This game, like with previous entries in the Yakuza-verse, if you will, I guess I'll coin that term for the video. But this game, like with Yakuza Like a Dragon, it does offer a performance and resolution mode. So similar to that game, it offers a 60 frames per second option. Now, I don't exactly know the resolution that it renders at. I am not Digital Foundry, so you'll probably have to wait a few days to hear what they have to say as far as that goes. But if I wanted to take an educated guess on the interwebs with my fake developer armchair degree, I would say that the performance mode ranges at 1440p and 60 frames if we're using Yakuza Like a Dragon as an indication. That was their last major game they could put out. And they have a resolution mode, which I assume is going to be native 4K at 30 frames per second. Now, the game defaults to the standard mode, which is the 60 frames per second mode. And honestly, that is my preferred way of playing all of the games going forward. We weren't really fortunate enough to have every single Yakuza game render at 60 FPS at launch, especially as they transitioned to the brand new Dragon engine, and that was a myriad of issues on its own. But now that we've gotten the new hardware with more capable consoles, we do have the option to have 60 frames per second. Now, the resolution mode is available for those who like things oh so pretty, witty, and bright. I'm just gonna be real, it's not the smoothest 30 FPS, and it's not because it drops down in frames. No. What I'm referring to is just the way that the game is rendered. 30 frames per second games obviously are not ideal for action titles, but when you do have to deal with a 30 FPS game, you look to games like Red Dead Redemption 2, when you're not talking about its input lag. You look to games like Naughty Dog, where the 30 FPS, obviously it's not ideal, but it's smooth, it's bearable, it's doable, and I think it comes down to how they handle frame pacing and a whole bunch of other stuff with the animations. They don't do that shit in the Yakuza games, so you feel that 30 FPS. When you played Judgment on PS4, you felt that 30 FPS, bro. It was just not it was not butter that we could have gotten. In addition to that, you do have dual language support. So if you are a longtime veteran of the franchise, you can continue to listen to the game in the original Japanese audio. But if you're someone who's new to the series, or you just want to see how these games sound in English, you do have the option of an English dub. But for the majority of my time playing this game, I did play it in Japanese. Not to sound like an elitist, but that's been the way I've been playing all of the Yakuza-verse games. It just feels really natural, and while I don't pretend to know Japanese, there's just something about these games that inherently feels at home when you're listening to it in Japanese. But the dub itself is pretty competent for what it is. Similar to Like a Dragon, Judgment does incorporate different subtitles, whether you're playing the game in Japanese or English, so that's really good. It doesn't sound as jilted, as awkward as some of the dubs we used to get in like the 80s, the 90s, and the early 2000s. So that is great. It gives the actors more creative freedom. But the one thing that you cannot escape, unfortunately, is the fact that you are still working within the confines of a pre-existing performance. Now, with anime, it's very easy because for the most part, anime mouth flaps just go up and down and up and down and up and down. Very rarely do they animate the actual words. But when you're getting into video game technology with budgets that are ranging in the millions going into $100 million, facial capture, mocap, things like that are doing a really good job at capturing the actors' performances down to a T. So in this game, they do the best that they can, but honestly, it just comes off as very, like, you can tell you're watching a dub, if that makes sense. No discredit to the actors at all, because they do the best of what they can, but it feels really awkward. That's just me. That's just my piece as far as that's concerned. But I do recognize that having an English dub is extremely important for this audience of gamers. There's a lot of people out there who just can't read subtitles, or they don't want to read subtitles in a high action octane game. And I totally understand that. So you've got a competent dub, asterisk included, of course. Alrighty, now that we've gotten that stuff out of the way, let's dive into the world of Lost Judgment, starting with the story. Now, I know there's going to be a lot of people watching this video questioning, hey, Neo, you said you've played the game for 10 hours. Are you going to be discussing spoilers? Is it safe to watch this video? Fear not, ladies, gentlemen, and everything in between. I am not going to be discussing spoilers in this video. Number one, because it's not my policy. I save spoiler discussions for their own video, so fear not. And number two, I'm kind of hesitant to discuss spoilers for a story that I am still playing. There's going to be a lot of stuff happening in the story, a lot of webs that they're weaving, and we're trying to untangle them, that I don't really want to talk about some of the things that I've experienced, because I don't know the full context of it. I don't know if there's going to be a crazy twist towards the end, so I am not going to discuss any of those spoilers. But there is one thing I will say. For anybody who has watched the trailers, or you didn't watch the trailers, it doesn't really matter too much, but this story does have balls. And by that, I mean it's tackling a lot of really sensitive subject matter. So right off the top, the story is tackling suicide. The story is tackling adolescent bullying. It's tackling a lot of stuff that, you know, if you've played previous Ryuga Gotoku Studios games, you know they get really deep with their narratives. But it is something I wanted to mention because of the sensitive subject matter. But from what I'm seeing thus far, they are handling it with very good care, and they're taking their time developing this story. I was really surprised that they would do a story involving high schoolers, because I mean, let's just be honest here. When you're dealing with stories involving high schoolers, more often than not, it's the high schoolers in those situations, no matter how dark and crazy the stories may be. Something like Death Note is an extremely adult story in its nature, but the main character is a high school student. But with the Judgment series, Yagami is a grown-ass adult. All of his friends are grown-ass adults, yet a major pillar of the story is dealing with adolescence and really sensitive subject matter to adolescents that connects to this entire mystery. So I am just very proud of Ryuga Gotoku Studios for their handling of it thus far. And from what I've played, again, it's another stellar narrative from this studio, so I can't wait to see how it develops. Now, in terms of some of the stuff that I can talk about, and this is where it gets kind of tricky to say the least. Now, with most of these Japanese RPG-like games, like in Bunny Ears quotations, I'm just using that as, I don't know, any other term to use to discuss games with the insane length of the recent Ryuga Gotoku titles. It takes a while for them to introduce a lot of the elements and the mechanics. So you could be 10 hours into this game and not really even scratch the surface of what the game has in store for you. So the game does a lot of hand-holding for the first 10 hours or so. There's not that much freedom available in the first 10 hours or so. It's very much so, go here, talk to this person, trigger this cutscene, whatever the events follow, that's what you do, rinse and repeat. So the freedom of doing side missions at your leisure and really just getting in touch with this entire world, that doesn't really follow until you get into the end of chapter 2, beginning of chapter 3, which, like I said, that's coming up on close to 10 hours of gameplay. So I'm at that point where I'm starting to see the world evolve. And one of the cool things about this world is the fact that it's really they're trying their best to show that this is different from Yakuza, because one thing that Judgment kind of got criticized for when it released is, okay, yeah, it's a spin-off and you have this guy named Yagami and he's a detective, but he didn't really do detective shit, if that makes sense. Like, yeah, he trailed people, he chased people, he zoomed in on things with his drone, like, and all that stuff. Like, yeah, that's cool, but it didn't really break up the monotony of a Yakuza type of game. At the end of the day, you were still, chasing people down, punching them, moving on to the next objective. It's pretty much the same in this game, but they do add in a couple of different elements. So there is this new thing called chatter, which is essentially the game's version of Twitter. One thing that I love about the Judgment games is that it's very much so a modern version of Yakuza, because Kiryu, his history, like, man, this dude existed in the 80s. You know what I'm saying? Like, he had his stories in the 80s and all the decades since. So he's an older dude. He doesn't really mess with this new technology. But Yagami is definitely, as weird as it sounds considering his age, he's definitely a child of this generation. So it has a lot of cool technology in there. Some of his friends, returning characters, are hacker folk. So, the stuff that they introduce in this game, you could definitely tell, oh, this is for a modern audience. So that's where chatter is introduced. Now, chatter is this game's version of Twitter. And the whole reason they introduced this is that it's their new version of handling sub-stories, side cases, things like that. So in previous Yakuza games, for the most part, how you experienced side missions was you were literally just running around in the world, and then something triggers and the camera changes and it's like, okay, here's a sub story. In this game, that stuff can still happen, but now there's a easier way of handling things with chatter. So you open up the app and it shows you a lot of these buzzwords, if you will, buzzwords being this world's version of hashtags, and then you can go and investigate them if they are of I guess the term I'll use is like high priority. So you have high priority buzzwords, you go there, it could trigger a submission, and then you can actually do some detective stuff. So you still have the elements from the previous game where you can go and you can explore some things and you can focus on stuff, but now with the inclusion of, the buzzword keywords to figure stuff out, the new gadgets and gizmos to help you solve the missions, in addition to actually using your brain for some of these stories and thinking like a detective. Okay, how would you do it in this situation? What do you have to focus on? They really do a great job at differentiating it from previous Yakuza sub-stories where it's literally just go here, fight this guy, move on to the next objective. So I'm really liking that change thus far. In addition to some things that they've changed that, honestly, I don't know why they included this. So Yagami now has a stamina bar when he's doing his detective stuff, or should I say his more physical detective stuff. So you guys remember in the last Judgment game with its 40 million chase segments, it was basically just Yagami running around, QTE segments, avoiding some things. Now he has a stamina bar when he does all that stuff. So when you're trailing an enemy, if an enemy starts noticing you, you have the option of hitting a button and it basically triggers a like a distraction. Like basically it's like, oh, if somebody sees you, it's like, oh no man, I'm on my phone, I'm not tailing you, yada yada yada. So it's similar to the I forgot what they were called, but the segments where you can hide behind like a trash can, or you can hide behind a wall or a taxi car so the enemy doesn't see you and it brings down the gauge. Now you can be in the open just being on your phone and they're just like, all right, whatever, man. The thing is that takes up stamina in that little gauge. So you only have a finite amount of time of using it. In addition to that, they now introduced a mechanic where Yagami can scale buildings, and this extends past the regular detective missions. You can actually scale buildings. Like in one mission, you're in a school and you can go outside. Of course, it's very linear, so it's not like it's an open world. It's still very much so a linear hub world, if that makes sense. But he can scale buildings and it has stamina attached to it. Now, this is the weirdest inclusion because I don't see why stamina would play a big role in this detective kind of game. I could sort of see that if it's something like an open world game a la Breath of the Wild, where stamina actually does add to the immersion to an extent. It may be really annoying to some, but it is a nice element. Here, it doesn't really make much sense because, at least from where I'm at in the game, your stamina never really plays that big of a role where it's like, okay, I really got to focus on my stamina, man. Like, you really have to suck at the game bad for your stamina to run out. So it was the strangest inclusion in the game. It just kind of feels like they put it in there just to, I don't know, have a new mechanic to show that it's different from the last game. Who knows? Things might change as I get further on in the game. But those were some of the interesting aspects that they either included and refined in the game. But diving into something that I know a lot of people have been wanting to know my take on, the brand new fighting style. So again, this is something that I kind of gave the first Judgment game flack for. I loved the combat to death. It's my personal favorite in the entire Yakuza series. However, I felt it was very limited by comparison to what Kiryu was able to pull off. So Kiryu, as you guys know, had multiple playstyles throughout the entirety of the Yakuza series. And one of the cool things about Kiryu is because he's kind of like this gray character, he could do whatever the hell he wanted. So yeah, he could beat the crap out of people with his fist, but he could also use weapons as well because he doesn't have any type of allegiance to any type of system. Yagami, on the other hand, unfortunately, because he is in the public eye, he is the detective, there are certain limitations that come with that. So even though he's fighting the scum of the earth, you're not going to see Yagami using a sword, or you're not going to see Yagami using a gun. He's pretty much just going to use his Fist of Fury, and in this case, those swift kicks. So he was limited to 2 play styles in the last game, which was Tiger style and Crane style. But now there's a 3rd play style in this game called Snake style. And it's so funny because the way they were marketing Snake style, for those who do not know, they kind of introduced it as sort of a non-lethal play style. Basically because in this game you do go up against, this isn't really a spoiler, but you're going to be fighting some high schoolers. You're going to be scrapping with some delinquent ass children. Yes, Yagami, a grown-ass adult, is going to be giving the beat down to these kids. And they introduced the Snake style as a way of sort of taking a non-lethal approach. But the funny thing about it, and the irony, is that either way, you could still kick the crap out of them with any play style you want. But it's so funny because if you look at the Snake style and the animations that come with it, it's very much so about disarming your enemies, reversals your enemy, like using their own weight against them instead of just going brute force. So there's some really awesome counters where if you block at the right time, Yagami does this little reversal animation and it basically like catches the enemy off guard. Like, wait, what the heck just happened? So that's really awesome. But more than that, some of the EX finishers, man, they're so comical because it looks like Yagami is going in for the takedown and then he just stops midpoint and it causes the enemy to faint. And what's really interesting is that when you do stuff like that, some of the enemies around you will cower in fear and it will prompt them to basically surrender to you. They'll just be sitting there cowering in fear. And then of course you can go in and go for some extra punches and stuff like that. But the irony in this situation, even though it's billed as a non-lethal playstyle, some of your finishers are still brutal. Like, I'm just being honest. Yagami going in there, sliding in with his leg, like, that dude is not going to be waking up anytime soon. He damn near broke that man's neck. But I digress. Snake style is definitely a worthy inclusion for this game, and just judging based off of the skill list, I can't wait to see where this playstyle goes, because that's another thing about early hours of these combat focused Yakuza games. You don't really have access to all of your skills, so it's very, very bare bones in the beginning with 1 or 2 combos. But as you start gaining SP, you're able to unlock some new things and do some fancy finishers and all that crazy stuff. So by the time you get to, like, 15 hours, 20 hours, end game levels of the fighting combat, it's just butter, man. So friggin' smooth. And that basically wraps up my time with Lost Judgment, or at least the first 10 hours of Lost Judgment. It might not seem like I had too much to say, but like I said, the first 10 hours of this game, there's really not a lot of stuff going on. There's a heavy amount of cutscenes, but I'm at the point in the game where it's starting to open up and I'm just excited about the potential. A lot of the things that I have seen are really freaking good. And going back to what I've always said about this series, it's more about the little additions that can make a big impact. Like, heck, I haven't even gotten to the point where I see the dog in this game. The dog that was shown off in the trailers, I can't wait to see that little guy. I did unlock the skateboard. That is really awesome to traverse the world. It might not be a major game changer in the grand scheme of things, but it's just a nice way of going around the world and making sure you don't really miss too much of what's happening. Because that's one thing I did kind of notice what I did with Like a Dragon. I was taking the taxi damn near everywhere just because I didn't care much about what was happening in the world. There weren't really too many events I was missing out on. But now with this skateboard, I have the option of faster method than running, and now I can still see some of the stuff that's happening in the world in addition to some of the more powerful enemies that exist. But other than that, you guys, post your comments down below on what you want to know about Lost Judgment. The game does not release for, I believe, another week or so. I think early access folk have access to it in just a couple of days. But if you guys have any questions about Judgment, Lost Judgment, if you will, you guys know what I'm talking about at this point, post them down below, and maybe I'll do a spoiler-free Q&A later down the road before launch. I don't know. We'll see. I'll leave that up to y'all. The ball is in your court. But for Media for now, my name is NGS signing out. Like always, I will catch you guys later. Peace.